regulations that aren't necessary, that aren't. I mean, you really don't believe that the state we live in, California, is lacking regulation. There's over 300,000 regulations. I mean,
Well, maybe they're needed.
They're not. When I tried to put in a garage door, I had to have 3 inspections. There should have been none. I should be allowed to change my garage door.
Are you kidding? Really? It was about a garage door?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is...
No, you know this about California. Come on.
No, I don't.
Well,
I'm sorry, I don't.
You don't? You've never heard that California is overtaxed and overregulated? That we are a one-party state where there's sort of no checks on that sort of extreme leftism.
Regular viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed, which had to be built to house this solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. And not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on. Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning, this product can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust.
California, right now, is seen by many as a disaster. The once shining beacon of the country has been twisted into a chaotic wreck that few can truly comprehend. Whenever this issue comes up, one name is inevitably tied to the fallout: the Democrats. And not without reason. So during one of his segments on Real Time, Maher unleashed on the DNC for unraveling California, and it was brutal. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's dive straight into it.
California just passed a law requiring large retailers to have a non-gendered toy section. A non-gendered toy section? Isn't Ken enough? We need a law for that? Do you have to inject yourselves into everything? From where you can throw a frisbee to who can braid hair? This is why so many people, by the way, were triggered by COVID policies. They were already sick of rules. Regulation should be a good issue for Democrats. It's certainly one they're associated with. And I think the average voter would agree that banks and chemical plants and drug companies need watching.
Bill Maher opens his critique by targeting California's heavy overregulation, a concern many critics say has become hard to ignore. In his view, the state has become one of the most tightly regulated systems in the U.S., where nearly every part of daily life is shaped by layers of rules, from business permits and housing laws to environmental policies that some say feel overly complex. Even simple everyday actions can require approvals that residents often see as unnecessary, creating a slow, frustrating, and highly bureaucratic environment. For many Californians, this has created pressure on multiple levels. Innovation becomes harder, costs continue to rise, and basic decisions can get delayed by administrative processes. Entrepreneurs struggle to start businesses, homeowners face constant compliance demands, and workers deal with rules that don't always reflect real-world conditions. Maher's main point goes beyond party politics. He argues that when regulation becomes too dense, it stops being protection and starts becoming a barrier that slows people down. And in his view, this growing frustration is why many believe California is not just struggling, but increasingly weighed down by the very system meant to manage it.
You can't dump the waste from your hog farm straight into the water supply. We're mostly all for that. But Democrats have become a parody of themselves, just making rules to make rules because it makes you feel like you're a better person. Making sure that everything bad never happens again, which you can never fully do. It just makes everyone else's life a drag. The Biden infrastructure bill has a provision that requires all new cars to install an alert system that goes off when you leave a baby in the back seat, which is something done only by crackheads and people who sadly, yes, do it on purpose. And after every one of us winds up bearing the cost for cars to install this alarm, you know who's going to ignore it? crackheads and people who do it on purpose.
Maher's right. California often rolls out new laws to make sure certain incidents never happen again, but those same incidents keep repeating because
Bill Maher continues his critique by pointing to a pattern he believes is common in California policymaking. He argues that the state often responds to specific incidents by creating new laws meant to prevent those exact situations from happening again. However, in his view, similar incidents still tend to occur over time because human behavior doesn't automatically change just because rules are introduced. Instead, he suggests that regulations gradually expand and become broader in scope, eventually affecting people who were never part of the original problem. To illustrate his point, Maher refers to cases where children are left unattended in vehicles. He notes that the policy response has included requirements for newer cars to be equipped with alert systems that warn drivers if a child is left inside.
A sensor light is not going to fix this problem, and Democrats no longer possess the common sense to understand that not every problem in the world can be fixed with a regulation. But don't tell that to the advocacy groups who also want every future car in America to only start when the driver blows into a breathalyzer. Oh great, my other car is a Karen.
Bill Maher continues the broader critique by pointing to what critics see as a key issue in California's policymaking approach. From this perspective, there is a recurring belief that every new problem requires another layer of regulation, as if adding more complexity is automatically the solution, instead of first checking whether existing systems are actually functioning properly. Critics argue that the usual response to challenges is to introduce more laws, more rules, and more oversight. But they counter that a system doesn't get fixed by constantly making it heavier or more complicated. In many cases, they say, enough regulations already exist. The real problem is not a lack of rules, but inconsistent or weak enforcement of the ones already in place. When enforcement fails, adding new layers of regulation may not solve the issue. Instead, it can create confusion, overlapping requirements, and unintended consequences that make the system harder to navigate for everyone.
Well, you know, it's also not safe to drive when you're crying. Should we make a car that follows your texts and stops the engine when you're dumped? Racism is bad. How about a car that won't start unless you play a message about tolerance from George Takei?
Bill Maher is openly mocking what he sees as an obsession with overregulation, arguing that many of these rules fail what he calls a basic common sense test. While he agrees the intentions often sound reasonable, preventing harm, protecting people, and avoiding repeat problems, he says there is a deeper flaw in the approach. His main point is that not every negative outcome can be fully eliminated through legislation. In his view, some level of risk is simply part of real life, and trying to regulate every possible scenario can lead to unintended consequences. What often happens, he argues, is a cycle where laws created for specific issues end up applying broadly to everyone. Over time, these rules stack up, overlap, and turn normal everyday activities into slower and more expensive bureaucratic processes. Things that should be simple can start requiring permits, compliance steps, and extra costs that most people never expected. The irony, according to Maher's critique, is that policies meant to make life safer and easier can sometimes do the opposite, creating frustration, delays, and complexity for the very people they were designed to help.
Regular viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed, which had to be built to house this solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. And not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on. Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning, this product can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust.
Maher argues that this is the core issue critics are pointing to. These kinds of laws can become draining over time, quietly consuming people's time, money, and energy. What often starts as a well-meaning rule can slowly turn into a complicated maze of paperwork, approvals, inspections, and unexpected costs that ordinary people are forced to deal with. Even small personal projects can become surprisingly complex once additional layers of requirements are added at each step. Critics often use home improvement as an example. Something as simple as replacing a roof can end up involving multiple permits, inspections, waiting periods, and repeated delays. Permits alone can feel like an endless cycle of forms, fees, and checkpoints, turning what should be a straightforward job into a long and frustrating process. From this perspective, Maher's frustration, as discussed here, resonates with some viewers because it highlights a broader concern.
No kidding, which is known to the state of California to cause cancer. That's right, California thinks you're going to snort your shed. I don't want to blow Pinocchio, I just want to put the lawnmower away.
Bill Maher takes a more sarcastic tone here, pointing to what he sees as regulatory overreach that feels excessive or even absurd. The example involves a pre-manufactured shed that is already cut, sealed, and fully finished before purchase. Critics argue that once installed, there is very little to no active cutting or sanding involved, so the chance of meaningful wood dust exposure is extremely low. Even if tiny traces exist, they are generally considered so minimal that they would likely cause nothing more than a mild, harmless irritation at most. Despite this, critics say some regulations still include warnings about potential risks, such as cancer-related exposure from wood dust. To skeptics, this creates a clear gap between actual risk and the level of warning being issued. From Maher's perspective, this reflects a broader issue, where regulation shifts from practical safety guidance into what feels like overextension, treating extremely unlikely risks as if they require major concern.
It's the vast network of regulators, administrators, inspectors, contract reviewers, project managers, fee assessors, special commissioners, zoning officers, and consultants whose jobs seem to be to make sure nothing ever happens and then charge you for it. The people who answer the phone, "Permit office, how may I hinder you?"
Bill Maher continues the critique, pointing to what critics describe as the real-world impact of heavy regulation. Instead of making life simpler, they argue, it often adds layers of bureaucracy that make basic tasks harder for ordinary people to manage. What should be a straightforward process can turn into long delays filled with paperwork, approvals, inspections, and repeated requirements. A common example is home construction in California. Critics say that before building even starts, permits and regulatory costs can take up a large portion of the budget, sometimes feeling almost as expensive as the construction itself. Each stage adds more forms, fees, and inspections, creating a system where progress feels slow and step-by-step rather than direct. By the time everything is approved, the excitement of building a home is often replaced with stress and frustration. From this perspective, the concern is broader.
Last year, Wyoming began construction on the largest wind farm in North America that will power 2 million homes in Arizona, Nevada, and California. And to think, it only took 18 years. Not to build it, to approve it. 18 backlogged, knuckle-dragging, pencil-pushing, thumb-twaddling, ball-scratching years to finally get to yes. When they started doing the paperwork, Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend wasn't even born.
Bill Maher expands the argument by pointing to large infrastructure projects as examples of how regulation can, in his view, slow progress to an extreme level. Critics say major energy and transport projects often take years, or even decades, to move from planning to completion due to environmental reviews, legal battles, shifting policies, and heavy regulatory procedures. A commonly cited example is Wyoming wind energy projects, which face long approval processes with multiple layers of review. Similarly, California's high-speed rail has been widely discussed for delays and rising costs linked to permitting and regulatory complexity. The Keystone XL pipeline is another example, which went through years of reviews, court cases, and political changes before being canceled. Large housing developments in cities also face long delays due to zoning disputes and approval bottlenecks. From this perspective, critics argue the issue is not just individual projects, but a broader system slowdown. When major infrastructure repeatedly takes decades to complete, it raises a key question. Is the system built to enable progress, or has it become one that unintentionally slows development to near paralysis?